Hi, I'm Monique Priestley, Vermont State Representative, Defender of Privacy, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 442 for August 18th, 2025. Hope you guys enjoyed my kind of news/DEF CON show last week. And my voice was so fried, and I apologize for that. But that is kind of what you go through at Hacker Summer Camp. There's a lot of loud spaces where you find yourself yelling to have a conversation. So it tends to mess your voice up for some period of time. Honestly, at this point, as I'm recording this on Saturday, I maybe just now kind of fully recovered from that week. It is crazy, but it's also a lot of fun. And again, I get to meet so many great people. And I've also, because of shows like that, managed to line up some really cool new interviews for you guys. So my patrons got some really interesting behind the scenes stories from that trip. So, and remember, by the way, if you become a patron, you get access to all the old stuff too. And at this point, there is a lot of bonus podcast content for you to consume. So just something to be thinking about if you've ever wanted to become a patron. And if you are, just go to fdsd.me/support and you'll find all the info. Okay, but today we have a really, really interesting interview with a fantastic human being named Monique Priestley. She is a state representative in Vermont and has been at the front lines of passing privacy legislation in her state and has some really interesting stories to tell. So today we are going to kind of look behind the scenes at how privacy legislation is made and in many cases, like this one, sadly, blocked. When I first wrote my book, the first edition of the book about 10 years ago, I think you could argue that there were a lot of people that were not aware of all the data that was being collected, or maybe thought they knew but didn't really care. Ignorance and apathy. I don't think that's the case anymore. I really don't. I think most of us have experienced multiple data breaches. Many of us have suffered from identity theft, or at least know someone who has. And we're just much more aware of how much of our very personal data is being collected and collated, correlated, shared, and sold, though most of us still don't know the full extent of it, I don't think. I don't think I know the full extent of it, which is very much by design. It is not meant to be out in the open, because I think if most people understood how bad it really was, maybe we'd be more motivated to have some privacy laws. So why don't we have privacy laws? Today we're going to learn one of the main reasons why, and that's big tech lobbyists and their techniques for killing or gutting meaningful privacy legislation. As part of the studying for this, Monique sent me some things, and one of them was a 2-hour Zoom call of the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, I found it was really interesting. Now, I'm also a bit of a civics nerd, and of course I'm a privacy nerd. But if you're interested in how privacy laws are created and blocked, there's a lot of interesting testimony in that committee meeting from both parties. It's a seriously bipartisan thing. And getting privacy laws passed in the U.S. is very, very difficult. We still have no real blanket privacy laws at the federal level, only some kind of old niche laws for very specific types of data and very specific circumstances that honestly have not aged very well. So a lot of the important work, honestly, is being done at the state level. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously wrote in a court decision that a single courageous state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel social and economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country. And that's where the whole laboratories of democracy concept originated. And so what happens at the state level is often nearly as impactful as what happens at the federal level, either because the state in question, like California, is so big that its economic power drives change for other states, or because once one state passes a popular and successful law, other states can simply copy that law and pass it themselves. Now, of course, there's also the downside of U.S. companies having to comply with potentially 50 different laws instead of a single unified federal law, an argument that they often make to undercut state laws, while using different tactics to thwart a federal law. But honestly, big tech companies today are multinational anyway, so they're honestly used to complying with different laws anyway. But today we are going to talk with Monique about kind of the sausage making of privacy law. And if you are a state or local representative, or if you know one, this interview should be very informative. But I also think it's important that we, as citizens who vote these representatives into office, understand how this happens, how this works. Okay, so let's get into it. But before I do, two quick things. First of all, we do talk about FOIA. We say it as a verb and a noun. That's FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And yes, there are just a few swear words sprinkled around in this interview, if that is something that might bother you. But that's enough of me talking. Let's get to our interview with Monique Priestley. Monique Priestley is a Vermont state representative serving her second term. She focuses on consumer protection, particularly data privacy, artificial intelligence, and right to repair, as well as the future of work. Monique serves on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee and several national tech policy committees. And I met you, I believe, in D.C. It was one of the parties that we were at, and we got to talking there, and I said, we got to get you on the show. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
So you were part of what I would say was a Herculean effort to pass a strong privacy bill in Vermont last summer, I think. And you got through it. You got it through the House and the Senate, despite powerful lobbying efforts, only to have it vetoed by the governor. So if you'll humor me, I'd like to kind of walk through that process, sort of like an adult version of Schoolhouse Rock, right? I'm just an adult. But before we get into that, first, tell me what got you into politics and championing privacy rights in particular? Was there like some moment or some issue or even like a constituent story that made this personal for you?
Yeah, I mean, so what got me into this was I had a whole career background in technology, from hardware and software and everything related. And then at the same time, all of my free time was spent volunteering for municipal, local government and nonprofits and things like that. And I actually turned a retail store into a community center nonprofit. And so people generally knew me from the area. And when our now Secretary of State for Vermont, Sarah Copeland-Hansis, she was our rep, and at the time she basically was like, "You're up. It's time for me to run for something else." And so I was a little bit voluntold, but also interested in doing it. And then when I was outside the door for kind of the town hall on Elections Day, a former senator was helping campaign for his wife for another office. And he said his one piece of advice was to pick a thing and own it. And so I wasn't sure. I figured it would be something around tech. I wasn't sure. And when House Commerce first started taking up earned wage access bills, that was my first flag of consumer protection. I had not realized that was something we would cover. And then the data privacy bill was the big flag when we dove into this super complicated bill. Everyone was confused and just it just seemed like a big thing to be regulating for part-time legislators and learning all this stuff. And so it was the first time where I was like, well, I feel comfortable learning and digging into this space, so I'm going to try to own privacy.
You sent me some really interesting links, and I looked through all of them and watched that really interesting video, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But it went through a lot of this, and you've learned a lot, I think. So I want to, as we're going through this, I want to kind of tease that out. But all right, so let's talk about how this legislative sausage is made using the Vermont Data Privacy Act 2024 as an example. So we're starting from scratch. Who writes the first draft of the bill? We often hear about having co-sponsors for a bill. Do you really need co-sponsors? And if so, how do you build that coalition?
Yeah, so this bill was a little bit different than some people might think, in that, so in 2023, my first year in office, we started looking at what was H121, and that was actually a committee bill. So it's actually it doesn't have individual sponsors. The committee itself is kind of the original writer of that, crafter of that was the Attorney General's office. And so they more or less had, my chair submit that, and then that is what we spent a lot of 2023 on. We got to the end of 2023 so for us, that's January through Mother's Day, more or less mid-May. Okay. And in Vermont, we spend, every state does it differently, but we spend in session, committee time, much of Tuesday through Friday for a week. So that's for those months, we were very focused on this. We got to the end, and everybody kind of amongst the committee and in general decided it wasn't, we wanted to start completely over. It wasn't where we wanted it to be. There was a lot of conflicts because there was a lot of copy and paste between different regulations from different areas, and there was a lot of contradictions. And so at the end of 2023, my chair was like, well, committee, we can use, and a lot of states do this, which is great and not great for a lot of different ways, is to copy each other. So he's like, we can copy where Connecticut's at, we can copy where California's at, or we can copy where Virginia's at. I knew from talking to a number of different people by that point, Virginia's not where anybody wanted to be, and I had really heard from civil society that like Connecticut is not where necessarily we wanted to be from our testimony, like what we heard in testimony. So I piped up and said California, and the rest of my committee agreed and echoed that. And then our chair was like, "Well, we're gonna do Connecticut." I basically took off from that call. I was like, I want to make sure I have a hand in this. It was really kind of under the lead of our vice chair at the time. And so I'm a brand new, member, haven't built enough trust up quite yet. So offline, I reached out to Senator James Maroney, who was the author and crafter and sponsor of the Connecticut Data Privacy Act, and said, I'm not super comfortable copying your work. Make me feel better about it. And what do you wish that you had done? Who do you wish who did you talk to? And so he started connecting me with lots of folks. And so that's kind of how that started. And then that summer, I really just networked as much as possible, had as many conversations as possible, and I worked on a new draft with folks. And so I submitted what was still a committee bill kind of amendment to 121, but that's kind of where we kicked off in the fall, or in the next January. Yeah.
All right, and just for reference, how long is a bill like this? How many pages are we talking?
So I forget. We ended up merging, but I think that was something like 65 pages or something. Okay. And it started out at 30 or something. Okay. So I doubled it in size, yeah.
All right, so once you've done all the drafting and you introduce your final draft for approval, how does that actually move through, committees and chambers? What's your process like? And it's somewhere along the way, people, I'm sure, have a chance to try to amend that. So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, totally. So basically when a bill is introduced, so it's read on the floor to everybody as saying what it is. So it's H121 and it's a Privacy Act. So that had already happened, but that is announced in one chamber. So in our case, it's the House. It's the House bill. And then once a bill is kind of announced, its first reading, then it's in committee for the chamber that kind of sponsors it. And this varies in every state, but in Vermont, we take a lot of testimony. In most states I've talked to, they take a minute of testimony from people, or a couple minutes.
Oh, wow.
We will do 10 minutes, 20 minutes, including Q&A. Sometimes we'll do an hour with certain people. So we spend, in our House Commerce Committee, we spend a lot of time digging in. And so we'll have a wide variety of people that are invited to come and speak, sometimes in person, often on Zoom, and they'll speak for or against the bill. We'll kind of go back and forth in committee, and often certain people will be chosen to work more on things offline, outside of committee, to really dig in and work with legislative counsel to edit verbiage. So that was me in that case. It really ended up kind of being the go-to person, and I was also the person that I took, being new, all the lobbyists wanted to meet with me, and so I took every meeting that I was asked for. So there's a lot of outside of committee time meeting with lobbyists and their clients. And so once things kind of go through committee and it gets to a point where the committee is ready to do a vote, you do a vote, it goes to the House floor for what is called second reading, which is really where you give, in Vermont at least, you give a big speech about why people should vote for it, and they have a vote. And then if that passes, there is an opportunity for people to propose amendments all along this process. But if all goes well and there's no amendments, it goes to a third reading. If that passes, it crosses over to the next chamber, so the state Senate, and that whole process starts all over again. Once it gets to passing out of the second body has an opportunity to pass it, to not pass it, to amend it, send it back with changes, or to do a committee of conference where they agree that like both committees will pass a thing, but really it needs to go into this conference where it's three senators, three House members, mixed parties. They go in and they basically negotiate between the two versions of the two chambers. In the case of H121, there was so much political stuff happening that the Senate was running out the clock, and so we ended up actually... we've ended up volleying back and forth amendments to each other. And one of the cases of the amendments was I took the age-appropriate design code, the kids code, which I had also championed, and so did a senator on the other side. And I combined the kids bill and the privacy and data broker pieces together. So actually, yeah, I think my estimate for pages was low because by the time that all happened, it was like 105 pages. Okay. And they refused to do a conference with us. So we basically did amendments back and forth the whole time until finally we actually had like I don't know how often this happens. I think it's pretty rare. We had basically my chair demanded a conference meeting in the cloakroom, secret room off the Senate room, and we had kind of like negotiations on the fly in that room, which was wild. Ultimately, passed both bodies, but got vetoed.
All right. So how do you determine who gets to determine who's going to come in and speak on, for or against this bill? How do you determine who you get to interview for these things? Yeah, so the chairs of the committees have all the power there. And in my kind of the 2023, 2024, H121 bill, I was definitely like giving a lot towards the end. In 2024, I was very much lining up like we need to hear from these people. We need to hear from these people who are against the bill. We need to hear from these people who are for the bill and who are neutral on the bill. So I really started getting involved in the testimony kind of witness building. All right. So at what point do lobbyists and industry groups enter the picture? How do they exert their influence exactly? Do big companies lobby directly, or do they sort of hide behind trade groups? How does that part work?
Yeah, so all of the above and all of the times. And it really depends on the bill and it depends on the sponsor. And so in 2023 and 4, I would say like everybody was asking for time. Instead of having all of our committee members meet with lobbyists individually, my chair had everyone just say like, no, you have to talk to Monique about that. And so it did give us kind of a streamlined, like I was the one hearing all of the arguments, the counter arguments, asking the questions. I had at that point kind of a list of questions that I asked every lobbyist and their client, so I had to have consistent kind of like background data for each point and where they were coming from. But they can, so often, and what's happened more kind of like this year and kind of a general kind of lobbying thing is they'll often try to meet early to just they'll see that a bill is like on the wall, so it hasn't actually been started to be discussed in committee yet formally, and they'll just kind of like ask for meetings typically with members that are more or less like, we want to just, give you some background or give you some education, or, it's usually a lot of, you need to learn about this topic. Here's some friends who are going to help you understand it. Right. But then there's also like, so in some cases, and what I prefer kind of to meet with at this point is there's regional or national. When it comes to the big companies, like national or international companies, they have regional or national lobbyists and government affairs people who will often meet with you and bring their client, and they have a lot of expertise in one specific, like they'll be like the tech kind of like person. At the local contract level, you have a bunch of different firms locally that are not experts and often not experts in any one given topic, and they might take, I don't even know how many, 10, 20 contracts in a firm, and then that gets divided between the employees of a firm, and they might be juggling. I mean, in some cases I saw where this gets like a little bit weird in my mind is you might have a company that has a local nonprofit hospitals, but also has the like utility companies, but also has like large social media companies such as like Meta, Google, Amazon, that kind of stuff, and then also has like some other random insert here company. And they might and then they, like I said, they might have 20 different ones. And so what I started realizing is, one, they may or may not be lawyers, they may or may not have a law degree. So you have people who are really just generally trying to track a bill's movement, so where it is in committee, who's talking about it, who's submitting it. Most lobbyists are sometimes getting paid to make sure they get appointment, like basically get their client sit down with like the Speaker of the House or the Leader of the Senate, the pro tem, or the governor, or so they're getting like sometimes bonuses on that kind of stuff. And then other times it's like they're lining up their client to be able to testify in a committee or get to sit with the chair to talk. What I started realizing though with the local is that I had moments where there was one specific moment where one lobbyist was saying that their utility company clients needed a certain change. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like on the privacy bill, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they want that? But I knew at the same time they represented a large social media company. And I'm like, that sounds more like what a social media company would want. And they would refuse. In that case, they were like refusing to let their client meet with us. And then we ended up seeing the CEO of the company, the utility company, in the cafeteria. And we talked to them and we're like, so your lobbyist says you want this, but we don't know why. And she's like, I don't know why we'd want that. And I'm like, great. Okay. Just needed to no. And that actually happened more times than I like thought about reflecting. And like now I don't want to take a meeting with a local lobbyist unless their client is on the call, and preferably the legal team for their clients is on the call. So because in cases they're asking for me to make changes to the legal policy language, and they often will have talking points, and if I try to either understand a talking point in detail or I try to push back with an alternative, they can't answer those questions often. And so it's just this game of telephone, which is really just slow and painful and runs out the clock, and sometimes on purpose. Sometimes they're trying, you only have a certain amount of time to move a bill, so sometimes they are trying to slow you down so you can't get things passed in time.
Well, just from watching that video you sent me, it seems like there's a coordinated effort, and it's almost this matrix of orthogonal companies and people that they're sending to represent them, where in fact I think one of the people in your meeting actually came right out and said that they are coordinating. The big companies have gone to a different sets of local groups or people that supposedly represent local groups and say, okay, we're going to divide and conquer. You guys are going to bring up these amendments. You guys are going to bring up these amendments, and you guys bring up these amendments. And you hear names like Chamber of Commerce, and there's national and local. There's Small Business Administration. ALEC is another one. I forget what ALEC stands for. And then one in particular in your case was the State Privacy and Security Coalition. And I think Politico was the one. I think you sent me this article that they reported this guy named Andrew Kingman and the SBSC were coordinating lobbying across 30 or more states. How transparent is that to you? And I know that eventually you figured this out, and you can tell me how eventually you did figure this out. But how do groups like these work together with the local groups to enhance their lobbying? And is there a countermeasure to that? I mean, is it transparent enough that you can see that coming or not?
Yeah, it is not transparent enough so that you can see it coming. And actually, it's like one of those things where I realize like my brain does pattern recognition really well. It's part of the reason that I see the gaps of people I need to connect with, and then I fill them in with, as I need expertise and things like that. So it's helpful. But it also was like, it felt sometimes like a little paranoid that I'd be like, wait a second, like this seems like it's coordinated. And it was, if I try to tell somebody that, they didn't believe it. A lot of times on these bills, I'd have moments where I was like, but I think that this person is probably tied to that person because they're saying the same thing. But like, they'd be like, you're crazy. That happened enough times with colleagues that now they're like, oh, you're not crazy. You're like completely reading these patterns correctly. So it was, if you're not paying attention, I would say a few things. One is like, there were moments when, so I was digging into the kind of like navigating the lobbying piece. There's subtle things that happen where, like at one point, after the camera went off, so we're live streaming everything in committee in Vermont. after the camera went off, there was somebody in our committee sitting behind me and tapping on a keyboard. And I knew it was an intern from one of the lobbying groups that was fighting our privacy bill and our kids' bill. And one of my colleagues turned to me, thinking no one was paying attention, and was asking me some pretty pointed questions on one of the bills. And I was like, Jim, I'm going to talk about this with you later. And he was like, I didn't get it. I was like, he kept going, and I'm like, no. I think we need to talk about this later. And like it kept going and going and going. They said all these things. And finally the person got up and left the room, and I shut the door, and I was like, guys, we are dealing with like one of the most heavy lobby bills in this building. Like in general, I actually learned, like, you know, maybe in the country, like, you have to be aware of who is who when you're in the cafeteria, when you're in this room. You have to learn who lobbyists are. I was like, we just had one of the top ones in our committee typing everything you were asking me and waiting for my responses. So there's stuff like that. But then, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I even as like a business owner and a member of some of the trade associations in the state, and have friends that are members of other trade associations who get these emails all the time where it's like, oh, there's a big scary bill, the privacy bill is going to kill your business, you should rally with us and kill it and complain and blah blah blah. And like that's coming from a local, like, statewide trade association. It could be the Chamber, it could be the Tech Alliance, it could be anything like that. Vermont Retail Grocers have, like, a whole list to their people. Basically, every group has their business kind of list and member list. And then you have some people who that are members of that list that know they're signing up for, like, lobbying alerts, and other ones that are small businesses. Like, I signed up for, you know, my chambers and stuff in the past, not thinking that they were lobbying. Like, it just wasn't, it's just disconnect of wanting to network versus wanting to be a part of killing stuff or supporting stuff. So you have that, but then often those groups are then tied to national, either directly tied to national parent entities, or indirectly members of something, or their members are part of something bigger. So, for instance, Google is a member of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, and I think they're a member of the Tech Alliance, and I think Amazon, maybe, I could get this wrong, but I think other tech companies are members of our Tech Alliance. And so you like get this case where you have this whole mix of mom and pop Vermont companies, but then the lobbying efforts are actually driven by the bigger companies, because that's where the money interests are. And yeah, so then we start, so SPSC, Andy Kingman and others, like there's other groups like that where they have, you know, TechNet, NetChoice, or other ones where if they come and testify, they often don't say like who their members are, but it takes one question and looking on, you know, the internet when you're in committee, when they decline to answer the question, where you're like, oh, so you represent Amazon and Google and Meta and all this stuff. They're typical.
Is there not any required transparency around that? I mean, shouldn't you know who's actually who they're representing?
So at least in Vermont, I don't know how this is handled in different states, you can flat out lie. Like, you don't have a transparency requirement and you can flat out lie. There is no requirement. You don't say an oath. I actually, like, wish that we had that, because there have been instances on many bills across different sectors where you hear basically stuff gets proven incorrect, and it's like, are they doing that on purpose, or did they really not know the information they were lying about? So yeah, it's in general, the lobbying stuff there's so many gray areas that are questionable. But yeah, so you generally don't know. What happens to me in a lot of cases is, like, we had Vermont Country Store, their CEO, come and testify. And I started looking into his background, and it turns out I don't know if he still is, I haven't looked recently, but at the time he was the board chair of, it was called the American Catalog Mailers Association. They went through a rebranding right while we were having this whole process, which is fascinating, to the American Commerce Marketing Association. But if you go back, like, I was kind of digging into that because there's a lot of U.S. Postal Service kind of like ties, and then I started reaching out to like professors, and I was like, can you give me a little bit of history on kind of like Postal Service catalog mailing and where it falls and like privacy? And it turned out like in 1974 around the Privacy Act, they had, like, that had been a whole thing that we would have had a much stronger privacy bill if it wasn't for catalog mail type stuff. And then I reached out to some investigative journalists, and we hopped on a call, and I was like, so I think there's like ties here. They're actually the ones that pointed out that connection to me, because I went in and I was like, I feel like there's something here. I can't put my finger on it in 2 minutes. They like were looking up and they're like, oh yeah, here's the connection. Here's all these case files. Here's all these like court cases they've done with Net Choice. Because the AMCA had been on court cases with Net Choice suing different retail, like against retail policies. So in every case, there's like always something like that. So I've made a lot of friends with investigative journalists and people who can like help me really quickly identify kind of the backstory.
Very interesting. Okay. Let's step back a minute and let's talk about like what are some of the key elements of a strong privacy bill. This is not the first go around. A lot of other states have tried it. We've obviously there are examples in other countries as well. So which one of these provisions sparked the most heated debate? Like which are the ones that are most contentious? And I've heard that just defining terminology itself is contentious. So walk us through some of that. What are the key elements of a privacy bill, and which ones do you tend to get the most pushback on?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the biggest one for sure is a private right of action. Mm-hmm. So the ability for an individual, if they're harmed by something, a privacy violation, that they have the right to go to court and sue a company for that violation. Companies will say that the Attorney General should have all the leeway there. Mm-hmm. The thing with that, though, is the Attorney General will flat out say, like, I don't represent people. I represent the state of Vermont. So if there's, like, a big enough case against the citizens of Vermont, then they might take a court case there. But in general, like, they don't represent the little guys, individual people. They just don't. And so that if we don't have a private right of action, then individuals have no recourse against companies. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is data minimization. So trying to tell companies that they should only be collecting the minimal amount of information they need to accomplish a task versus allowing them to just collect everything they want and then have policy guidance once they have all of the data. And then definitions themselves. It's interesting. I actually went to an event where somebody asked me, I was giving a keynote, and somebody asked me from a company, like, why do states keep copying each other's definitions for the privacy policies? They're broken. It doesn't make any sense. And I was like, well, you hire lobbyists that tell us we have to do that because of interoperability, quote unquote. Right. So it's interesting. I think for the most part, we try to keep definitions the same, but that also means if definitions are always the same, they can never evolve. So it doesn't make any sense. Even as especially as technology changes, those definitions have to change to keep up. If we think about like biometric data or sensitive data, for instance, like you might, if you're collecting like face and your fingerprints and your voice, but then now there's new technology to map out your vein patterns that didn't exist when you write the definition. So you have to be able to evolve those.
Well, I know that a lot of companies will push back and say, we don't sell customers information. We don't sell their information. And I think technically that's true because like Amazon and Google, they don't sell the information. They sell access to the information. Right? Because the information is the gold, right? They don't want to give that part away, but they do certainly want to sell access to that information via their marketing arm. So I assume that's another term that gets.
Well, yeah. So the sale for sure, the definition of sale for sure, but it's like a lot of mom and pops will say, like, I don't sell data, but they also don't want you to interrupt the flow of the data for the companies that are buying and selling the data so that they can use marketing and advertising products. So they might not be selling it, but they probably are connected to some source, like some piece where someone is buying, either they're buying the data or somebody else is buying the data that benefits them. Right.
Now, I know another way that a lot of these bills get tweaked to try to be more palatable to these companies working through the lobbying firms is they put threshold limits on the application of these laws. Things like, this only applies to a company over a certain number of customers or over a certain amount of revenue. That seems to be a point of contention as well, where to set that line. And yet I would still have to think that it's the small companies that don't have IT departments, that don't know what they're doing in terms of privacy, that probably need to be governed the most. So talk to us how that dynamic plays out.
Yeah, that is one of the hardest ones, because in general, I mean, and actually I have taken a job and I'm working on privacy compliance right now, so I'm actually seeing from the ground like how risky it is and how liable a company is for having any amounts of like personal information, and how much at risk a company is putting itself at like bankruptcy for just like one data breach. Like that's totally possible. So part of this is like, I want businesses to be taking privacy seriously in 2025 so that they're not putting themselves at risk. But at the same point, all of the, kind of funneling down from national interests down to the state trade associations, to all the business members of a trade association will say that it'll cost too much to comply. So that's when you have the threshold. So in most state cases, though, if you look at state policies across all of the states that have passed, the threshold is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it was like, it started for a lot of states, it was 100. The personal, like the records of 100,000 residents of a state per year is kind of what most of the thresholds started out for, the kind of the industry flavored bill that a lot of states have passed. And then states have whittled that down. So what we were looking at wasn't the number of 100,000 or 30,000 or 25,000. What we were looking at is the trend of the relative kind of ratio of who it was going to apply to the population of the state. And what we saw was that states had gotten the threshold down to like 1% of their population. So when I introduced the bill, I wanted to basically get to a point where it was 1% of our population, which is like 6,250 is what our proposal was, because we're a little over we're around 6.5. And everybody freaked out at that, because they're like, well, every company is going to have 6,000 records. And so they really pushed on, like, you need to have 30,000, because that's what, like, New Hampshire and Connecticut and everybody did. And so that was, like, hard to explain that, like, well, I mean, ultimately, we want it at zero. We want every business to be thinking about privacy and thinking about the risks and the liability, and be just also building a ecosystem of trust with their customers in 2025. Like, people have less and less trust with the internet and with doing business on the internet. And so a company that can actually champion that they're taking care of people's data, I think puts them in a much better position to be competitive.
A lot of the times it comes up, certainly at the political level, when you're trying to pass bills like this. Oh, you got to kill small businesses, and I get that, because a lot of these small businesses on their own don't have the resources or the experience to do these things. But these small businesses have banded together to have lobbying groups work for them as a group. Why is there not some sort of a technical support thing for all the businesses to put money into, and then have like this consortium help each of them? You know what I mean? You banded together to have a common lobby group. Why not band together to have some common insurance against these things, or to spread the risk, or just, to have anyway, it seems like you could have done it for that too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, it's just like relative to like business costs, I'm thinking like I talked to some compliance folks, and they're like, oh, I would do what they need for compliance for $1,000. And I'm like, okay. So then you think, like, I've done web design development for decades. And so, I mean, you're looking at like a mom and pop is probably looking at anywhere from like 8,000 to 15,000 easily as a starting point for like a website design. And then how much are they paying for like liability insurance per year? Like those are just things that they have to do in order to have like responsible and accessible businesses in 2025. So why would you not spend a fraction of that making sure that it's safe?
Right.
Yeah.
And well, probably the short answer is because they don't have to.
Right, they don't have to. Yeah.
Yet.
Yeah.
So, all right, I want to come back to that private right of action thing, because that definitely is a big thing. And that is, And I understand where a lot of companies are like, look, we don't want death by a thousand cuts. We don't want every single individual harmed person to be able to come at us with an individual lawsuit. Let's bring this under the umbrella of the state's attorneys general and, try to consolidate. And yet I'm guessing, and I don't know if you have numbers on this, but you alluded to this, that it doesn't happen that often unless it's a really broad problem throughout the state. Even if someone gets horribly harmed by this, a person, unless there's a lot of people who get similarly horribly harmed, it's not going to draw the attention of the AG. I also know that from watching your video that there are, and some other things I've read, that there are other points that you could bring into this argument that allow for compromise. For example, I remember we talked about cure periods. So when things get brought up, they're not immediately subject to lawsuits because they've got some sort of a grace period to bring things into compliance or to fix things. Some people have put in things in the bills that limit damages. Like there's not punitive damages. They're just injunctive relief. Like just, we'll fix the problem that we caused to the level that we caused it. Talk about some of the other ways that there's middle ground between all or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in general, we definitely get the, we're going to be overrun by lawyers coming after us. Somehow they think that every company is there's gonna be enough lawyers and time and money for everyone to have 100 lawsuits at the same time. I don't know how that works, but yeah, so AG enforcement, private right of action, and we did build in a cure period, so we built in, I think it was, I forget at this point. I think it was almost 150 days or something of time for delay for I'm going to you and saying your website is your website collecting my data, and you say yes or no, and I say please remove my data, you say yes or no, and that each of that is 45-day window or something. So and then you don't do it, and then I say I'm gonna sue you. That was a span of almost half a year, 6 months I think. And in some cases people are in harm's way. They might be that their home address is being sold and they don't want it to be sold anymore. Or it could be that they're trying to apply for a mortgage or a loan, and something on something on some kind of website or credit report or something is inaccurate, and so they're actually being denied really important things, and it's because one piece of data isn't being corrected. If you lose your job or you lose your some kind of health issue happens or you lose your insurance, those are real harm, real things that could potentially impact a person's life significantly.
Yeah, right.
And so there's cure period. There was being generally we're trying to fill the menu of having fines and having injunctive relief and all that kind of stuff in order to negotiate down to something that's reasonable, whether or not it's one or two of those things. The fight never seems to get that far because the players kind of from the big tech, big data side of things, they don't want to negotiate about a private right of action or what form that takes. They literally, actually, on calls I had this year, they had kind of been messing around with not really negotiating with my chair, and finally I reached out to two big players directly, and I was like, let's cut the shit. let's negotiate. And one was like, well, I'm not willing to talk to you at all unless you're taking out the private right of action entirely. And I'm at that point I was like, okay, fine. I mean, I know that. But it's ridiculous. I've talked to some companies at events and things like that, and they're like, why don't you just make it a criminal offense for the board or for the CEO or why don't you add some kind of really scary thing for the leadership team? And I'm like, great, let's do that. That's fine. So in some cases I do want to see what criminal offense is. But yeah, it's a non-negotiable, non-conversation that's just a wall that people... Stonewalling is actually a very viable lobbying tactic, to just refuse to have a conversation.
What are some of the other tactics, and I'm curious in particular the ones that you ran into, or maybe in your talks with the legislators from other states, what are some of the common tactics that are used to submarine a bill or to run out the clock? What are some of the things that they have learned to do? Put poison pills, amendments in bills that, they somehow get some writer put on that the governor won't sign, kind of thing. What are some other things you ran into? I'd love to hear any particular examples that you specifically ran into.
Yeah, so I mean, ones that I specifically ran into. One is like an obvious one is having a conversation with me about one thing and then going and telling my committee members, my chair, my anything, a completely different thing. We actually had to make it so that I started having like a quote unquote buddy in my meetings so that when they go and lie about what I said later, they can't. Wild. Another thing, I mean, there was just definitely like intimidation type stuff. So like I would ask for a one-on-one or a one-on-two, like with a lobbyist and their client, and in some cases, I showed up to one call, and it was a team of 9 lawyers from around the country, and that was supposed to be a one-on-one, and it was just like basically it's a like intimidation. I know what you're talking about. There was a lot, especially as a first termer in 23, 24. There was a lot of people, lobbyists, who are like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're new to this. You're not supposed to be wherever you are. So like in both years, I've spent a lot of time in the Senate, in the AG's office, like talking to the people the players who have influence on this too. So I would get a lot of like, you're not supposed to do this as a rep. You don't know what you're doing. And then there's a lot of like, you can't possibly understand, or, just any type of like thing like that. And I know other people I've talked to other legislators who have heard that, especially coming at it with tech backgrounds. They'll be like, you can't implement this, and you're gonna kill the internet, you're gonna kill the economy. In some cases, you're gonna kill puppies and cats because you literally are stripping away like targeted marketing that might have people adopt cats, and then they're gonna die because people won't find them. And so there's stuff like that. We're gonna pull our services out of the state of Vermont completely, so like Facebook will just leave, Amazon will just leave. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of just the influence behind the scenes. So I've been able to pick up on it more when I know that people are either, there's been some cases where there was like romantic relationships between lobbyists and politicians, legislators. Or just like friends relationships, and that happens as a small state. So like, and I also have hung out plenty of times with people, lobbyists.
Well, and there's often a revolving door between
totally.
politics and corporations.
Yeah, for sure. So, but you can, the tactic kind of there is like, they're using that relationship to sway somebody. You can easily kind of tell that that's happening, though, because I would ask pointed questions about specific things, and I would ask, even if it was a softball question, there's only so many talking points they've been prepped on, and then they've run out those talking points, and they can't translate those talking points into a bigger idea or an idea that's similar because they haven't been taught how to translate it to another scenario. What else? I got backstabbed hard the first year because I was helping one firm run a bill and was championing it for them, and then at the same time they had another client who wanted to kill the privacy bill. And I didn't realize that I think, like, basically they had negotiated between the clients to not care about the private right of action. So they, like, didn't see it as a conflict. But basically I was championing one bill at one time. I was telling them all these things I was doing and working on. And then they were using it against me to kill my privacy bill. So there's that. I don't know. There's, I think Sarah Love on the video had talked about death by 1,000 cuts. So what you had said is, like, yeah, we'll have different entities, different like firms working together, and I had gotten some evidence from somebody of weekly emails that were happening between all of the firms with Kingman, and as an example, and so they were coordinating basically on like how to rebut all of the different like provisions in the bill and that kind of stuff. But I mean, in a lot of ways, like it was really helpful to see all the tactics that first year and to experience all of this, because then I was like, well, I need to build a coalition. I need to learn how to do rebuttal documents on the fly. I need to have as many experts on my side as possible that I can call on the fly and be like, hey, they just said this. Can you tell me if it's true and or how to fight it? And also nearly all the things they told me that I wasn't supposed to do, I'm like, well, I'm going to do those twice as much. So I spent most of my time this year in the Senate. I built testimony lists. I built FAQs. I gave people floor support documents for stuff. So it was a lot of like all the tactics that were being used. I'm like, well, I can do those too.
obviously these groups are working together. They're collaborating, they're coordinating across states with some of these higher level groups. And I thought what was fascinating to me was in the video sent is that obviously, at least in this one instance, and I'd like to, you can set up for how that video came together, that you guys coordinated across states as well. Is that a common thing? Is there a similar strategic network of representatives in various state legislatures who have coalitions that get together and share these stories so that, oh yeah, those guys tried to do this to us, don't let them do that to you? Is there a similar cabal on the...
I don't think there is. So actually that was one of the points that was fascinating for me as a new person. So coming into this, I came in with I coordinated and founded nonprofits and networks and coalitions of... There was a point where I was on 24 different nonprofit boards at generally the same time, and I started seeing again pattern recognition of I'm on these 5 economic development focused orgs that are all going after the same grants for the same population at the same time, and they've never talked to each other. Or I organized community events where, at my nonprofit, where I'd have all of the regional select board chairs or conservation commission people or justices of peace come in, and I would host community discussions where we get to learn about leadership and about how to engage in community stuff. And so in those conversations, they would be like, well, we are, town clerks from the 5 neighboring towns in the area, but we've never met each other. We've never had a conversation. And so that was kind of for me, that was where my brain naturally was. And so I started reading about kind of the lobbying on data privacy bills generally, and a bunch of Politico articles came up. I think maybe Text Transparency Project articles. And so in basically the legislators that were featured in those, I emailed and I said, hey, can we talk? And so in each case we had phone calls, and it was super fun because I was like, hey, there's just an army of lobbyists, and I'm seeing that you're experiencing the same kind of thing. I want to have you just come and tell your story with me and with a bunch of other people on the record. And they're like, fuck yeah. So we had that. I basically asked my chair, I was like, can you just let me take over an afternoon of testimony? And so I coordinated all of the people. We did that. I didn't know how it was going to work out, but basically I just asked, people can watch that online, but asked so I'm seeing this tactic, are you seeing this? And they said yes. And and it was everyone. A lot of my colleagues were I was why are people I invited national press onto that as well to watch that, and so it blew up. And so I was asking colleagues, I was like, everybody's kind of making a big deal about this. I don't understand. We're just having a conversation. We're working on the same things. Why wouldn't we want to hear from other states? And they were just like, no, that's not a thing. States don't ask other states to come tell them. It's none of their business, what we're doing. I'm wait, but what? But they're working on the same thing.
Right.
And hearing from the same people. So anyway, it was that does not happen. And it was, people were like, what is this? It's been really empowering for a lot of groups who... have dealt with the lobbying and have been gaslit basically that there's no coordination, and no, they don't do the same thing, and no, they don't say the same thing. So that, I've stayed in touch with all of them that came and testified, and generally have been really kind of more proactively reaching out to people on similar bills to say, hey, can we chat about what you're seeing? And also I'll share any resources you need and talk through anything, because in general, industry is spending millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to fight these bills, and we are often barely paid legislators with no staff, no offices, no team, and maybe no expertise at all.
Well, it was really, really interesting to see, and I'll put a link in the show notes if anybody. I know it's a little bit long, but I think it's fascinating to watch. One of the most interesting guests you had in there was, I think he was a Republican from Montana or somewhere. He had some really interesting insights that he passed along. And I was like, man, I hope this is happening more often, because it seems like that's the only way you're going to be able to fight back against this, because they obviously have national campaigns fighting at the local level. You guys need to kind of have the same thing.
Yeah, and actually, now you said like we had a Whitney Westerfield from
Yes.
Kentucky and Daniel Zolnikoff from Montana, and they are so great. And that was actually the power of especially Whitney Westerfield going into the details about
That
a
was who I
private
was
right
thinking
of
of. It was
action.
Kentucky, not
Yeah,
Montana, but yeah, yeah.
yeah, both of them. So as soon as we kind of ended, my chair said to me something along the lines of like, I didn't know if I was like, you were kind of driving this like democratic, potentially like values driven thing or not. And like, I wasn't sure, but I was just trusting you. He's like, but now that I hear it from a Republican, I'm on board. And he trusted, it was so great. He was, trusting me all along, but there was always a question in his mind. So that was a pivotal moment for us, I would say, and for the bill, but also Whitney championing the private right of action. My chair gave an amazing, he got it after Whitney shared that, and Chair Marcotte gave an amazing private right of action speech on the House floor that was basically like, this isn't about party, this isn't about, it was a really strong moment for him to be like, this is a truly nonpartisan, bipartisan effort. It is about people, and it is about people against corporations, basically, and it was so good. And so that hearing helped us as well, like just relationship-wise.
All right, so let's bring it back to our little schoolhouse rock thing. Let's wrap this up. So you got this passed through the House and the Senate, and then the governor decided to veto the bill. And you had some majorities, but it wasn't enough to override the veto. So why did your governor decide to veto it? Is the lobbying at the governor level different than lobbying against the with the legislature? Where you've got a bunch of people versus maybe one person. And then in your case, how did that play out with the veto and the attempt to override?
Yeah, so we had enough. Basically, when a bill goes to the governor, he has options in Vermont. So he can either sign it and pass it. He can either not sign it but let it run out the clock for 5 days and it passes automatically. And it's kind of a sign of like, I'm gonna let this go, but I'm not like sure about it. Or you can veto. And then, so the House, in that case, he vetoed it. The House had enough to overwhelmingly of the day. We actually overrode, 8 bills, 12 bills or something like that. And it was the only bill of the day that actually had the most votes of any override, I think, that day. But then it was the only bill that went to the Senate, and the Senate didn't uphold the veto. And part of there was even more intense lobbying on the Senate side, and so there's lobbying on the Senate side, which is a whole other thing. And then when it goes to the governor, generally he is getting inundated, and actually Politico FOIA'd the governor for an article, and we had been told that the governor's office got something like 300 complaints against the bill and nothing in support of the bill. But what the FOIA showed was there was 88 emails in support of the bill and 82 against the bill, and that didn't even count the wave of Consumer Report stuff that came later. But generally I think he has, any other leader, people who he turns to for advice, but also then has both emails and phone calls and stuff from the public, and also very much has the same lobbyists in his ear as well. So, generally, industry would come in at the, kind of towards the end of the House process, kind of the end of the Senate process, and then when it was about to go to the governor. And I would hear somebody would be like, oh yeah, such and such corporation is here to meet with the governor today. Great, to tell him to veto the bill. Great. So anyways, yeah.
All right. So looking back on this experience, what did you learn from this process, and how will it impact future efforts to pass a privacy bill? I hope you guys aren't going to give up.
No.
So, and is there, an argument to be made for doing incremental reforms, starting with some sort of a foundational bill that maybe you can get more people to sign on to, and then improving it over time? Even in California, the CCPA was refined with the CPRA over time, and I think that fixed some things that people didn't like about the CCPA. So is there an argument to be made for incrementalism and doing this in stages? What are your main takeaways from this experience?
Yeah, I mean, so main takeaway for sure is that industry has an army, and it's from having conversations with people ever since who have, who were former national kind of like level lobbyists, like they're like, you have no idea. Like the calls where we would jump on a weekly call and it'd be 100 lobbyists that had, teams underneath them all across the country. So you don't even understand what you're up against. And I'm like, well, I think I have some idea, but so I think in that it's just been, and anybody listening who wants to help, like generally I am a kind of naturally network and love talking to people and love learning. So that, and coalition building and connecting. So that goes to my benefit in that, like, there are so many people who have heard interviews like this and who have read articles and stuff like that who have reached out to say, like, I want to help. I want to be an expert you can call at 6 a.m. or, whatever. And so building that coalition in order to, even though it's like David versus Goliath, it's like if we have a army of 100 to an army of 10,000, like it's at least not 1 against 10,000
right.
or 10 against 10,000.
Right.
And so, I think that is a big one. And then just really being like having so much material ahead of time, like built up, like testimony lists, people ready to testify on the fly, people on a moment's notice I can call and say this was just said. Because some of the like lobbying tactics also, I think as part of this is like relationship building with other legislators. Like I would be told by a lobbyist, like, oh, you can't do that. Massachusetts is like doing this thing, and like that goes against what you're trying to do. And I'm like, really? Let me call Massachusetts. So I would need to call. So those relationships are so important. And then just having to like learning all the time. So I read. I'm like I said, I'm doing privacy compliance right now. I'm reading all the textbooks. I'm going to any talks I can go to, really trying to actually learn the policy and the implementability kind of the policy, business rules. And so that's helpful to just learn from experts on what their software actually does, and how I might interrupt things. That's a big one. Oh, incremental reform. So yes and no. I think for incremental reform, like I wish that we could start at a place where it felt like we were actually accomplishing anything. Like if we could do that, sure, incremental reform. But it feels like, what our bill started as originally was a copy of other bills, which were a copy of other bills submitted by industry itself, to say, like, this is what we feel like complying with. So that doesn't feel great to, like, start with what they want and what they know they can get away with. And I have just learned, and I think since more of us are talking, we're also talking about, like, hey, I want to try this amendment or I want to pass this bill, but how is that going to negatively affect you? Because anything that we do in Vermont, they're going to go to Massachusetts or insert any state and say, like, well, Vermont just did this, you should do it too, or they failed to do this, so you shouldn't bother, that kind of stuff. So it's anything we do can be spun by lobbyists. So we have to be really careful with what we're passing and what we're adjusting, not only for our own citizens, but the citizens of America across the board.
All right. Well, so last question before we go. What is the current state of affairs? What states are currently trying to pass privacy legislation? Are you guys revising yours and bringing it up again this year? And if you had to pick one, like what is the best state template? I mean, probably yours is the one I'm going to guess is the one you're going to say. But and then of course I've got it. As citizens and consumers, how do we help you?
Yeah. Okay. So we are. So in 2020, basically after it vetoed, I just dug in more, and things blew up in the press. So a lot of people reached out to help. So I just have had so many more experts involved. So rewrote a bill, and in this case, my chair asked me to submit the bill myself and collect sponsors, rather than do a committee bill. And so I did that, and I separated 121, where we started, out into 3 different bills. So we had the kids product safety kind of protection online safety bill, and then a data broker bill, 2 data broker bills, and the privacy bill. And so each of those are running separately and being worked on separately. This year with lobbyists, they said basically to my chair, we're not going to come in and testify, so you can just like go ahead and do what you're going to do. We'll go to the Senate and we'll just kill your stuff in the Senate. So we went to the Senate, and basically were like, hey, can you start our bills off? And so they, try to get them to us, and then we'll do what we can, and we'll deal with the lobbyists on our end. And so they did. So for the privacy bill, Senate introduced S71 and S69, which did pass this year, which is the age-appropriate design code. But S71 is the main privacy bill. So what I did was they were unable to, they didn't think they could move that. So I said, at the same time, industry had a bill, S93, submitted. So I told the senators to strike all, which means completely replace all of the text of S71, the strong bill, with all of the text from S93, the weak industry bill. Just inject that language in there. I'll help make sure everybody's on board and they won't fight it on the Senate floor, and then you'll get it to us and we'll fix it on our side. So that's what happened. So they got it out, they got it moving without any fight on the Senate floor, and so now we have it. And on the last day of session, our committee submitted an amendment to completely reset the text back to the strong version with a few adjustments. So, yeah. So going with that, I'm spending all fall doing a statewide privacy tour and in everywhere. So truly trying to get the public and small businesses engaged on the matter to basically fight the lobbying.
And as citizens, consumers, what are the most effective ways that we can help? Is it voting with our pocketbook? Is it obviously trying to vote representatives into office that will support these things? Are letter campaigns, calling? What do you find most effective? What makes a representative respond?
Yeah, so all of the above. So definitely making sure who is in those seats. In one case, we had a really strong opponent in the House on a different bill that I have, a data broker bill. So would love to see him replaced. So somebody's spending some money against that. But yeah, that is definitely a thing. Letter writing, emailing, calling for sure, and also showing up in person, honestly, and sharing. For me, if anybody is listening, whether it's in Vermont or elsewhere, I need stories from business, especially small business owners, that can share kind of benefits of how, something bad happens and then they were able to correct it and their business is flourishing, or something bad happened, they went out of business and honestly, the sad stories of and devastating stories of my business went under, got a data breach, and now I'm done. And also individuals, so people whose identity was stolen or whose kids, committed suicide because their data was shared with somebody, or they were reached by an unwanted kind of adult. All of the horrifying. If you have a sad, horrifying story and you want to share it with me confidentially, it helps me build the case. And in some cases, people go on the record to share those.
Well, thank you very much for lifting the curtain back and let us see how this stuff works behind the scenes. And thank you for stepping up and fighting the good fight for us in your state, and obviously having impacts outside the state as well. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing that with us.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Big thanks again to Monique for coming on the show. I knew when I met her that I had to have her on the show, and it did not disappoint. This was really okay. Look, I fully cop to being a civics nerd and a privacy nerd, so should not be surprising that I enjoyed that conversation. But I really hope you did too. And I really just find this behind the scenes information fascinating, understanding what really happens when trying to write and pass legislation, and specifically how industry lobbyists work to undermine bills that would greatly benefit consumers, frankly. I also think this interview highlights both how these legislators at state and local level are horribly outmatched and outspent, but also how they can be banding together across state lines to support each other and level the playing field. Sounds like we need a lot more of that. So again, I will recommend that you watch this video from this committee meeting, but let me just describe one little piece of that. There was a person named Whitney Westerfield, a Republican from Kentucky, who gave a really great example. And this was, I think this is something he did as when he was making his case in his state. And he brought out a map showing which restaurant is most popular after church in each state, like every state. So just his point was, stop for a minute and think about how they were able to make this chart. Where did they get that data? they would have had to have tracked the location of a lot of people as they left their place of worship. So he used that chart to make a point that none of your constituents would support this level of tracking if they really knew what was going on. But he also made a great point, and this is a quote from him, who says, if complying with these privacy laws is too expensive, then just stop collecting the data. Another thing he mentioned that was kind of cool was he talked about an online form that a harmed consumer can file with their Office of the Attorney General, which resulted in an automatic form letter being sent to the named company saying, hey, cut this out. And supposedly this works, like, according to him, 70% of the time. And he proposed that the private right of action only be enabled after this letter goes out, plus some time to allow them to comply, which we talked about here, called a cure period. And also that the private right of action is only for injunctive relief and not punitive damages. There's compromises to be had here. We can have the private right of action, which is really important, but not have it be as burdensome as a lot of these companies and certainly their lobbyists are making it out to be. So anyway, again, I'll just make one more pitch. If you're interested in this at all, definitely check out that video. It's in the show notes. All right, so patrons will get a little bonus Q&A with my guest as usual. I asked Monique what it's like to be in state politics. For example, you may not know that in a lot of cases at state politics level, it's not your main job. It's often your second job. And, that has economic implications for who can afford to do that. And it can often be hard to find a day job that will allow you to basically moonlight as a politician in your state. We talk about where Democrats and Republicans tend to agree on privacy-related issues. And I also know that Monique is working on some AI legislation, so we talk a little bit about that as well. So patrons, you will get that bonus content as usual on Thursdays. So looking at what's coming up, guys, I have so many interviews on the books. I've got like 5 already scheduled with maybe 5 more in the process of being scheduled. So basically I've already got enough on the books to finish out this year pretty much. I just recorded a rare panel type interview with like 3 other people who are part of or are related to the EFF Ray Hunter project, which is about finding cell site simulators. So we'll get an update on what the Stingray technology looks like now. And we'll also talk about a cheap but powerful tool that anyone, and any one of you certainly, could use to help expose the use of these surreptitious mass surveillance systems. So that will be the next interview to air. This week, I'll be interviewing Carissa Belize about the ethical aspects of modern AI. And then future interviews, we'll be revisiting the threats to our critical infrastructure. We'll be talking some hacker history. We'll be talking about some privacy-preserving tools and much, much more. There's a lot of great stuff coming down the pike. So again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, and then you won't miss any of that. All right, that is going to do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge debt.